Hello, and welcome to the Gamer's Closet. I'm your host, Douglas Weed, and today we're going to be talking about Easy Money. Easy Money is a game manufactured in 1935 by Milton Bradley. Here next to me is the 1936 edition. The game runs for about 2 hours of game time, runs for ages 7 and up, and is rated for 2 to 6 players. But let's dig into it a little further, shall we?
Now, from Milton Bradley, it's
Bingo! You take a card and put it in a rack. If you don't want it, put it back. Very first player to make a run says,
Bingo!
what fun!
That's Racco, Milton Bradley's great card game for 2, 3, or 4 players of any age. Get
Bingo!
What fun!
And here's another great fun game from Milton Bradley.
Easy money, easy money. You buy some land and houses too. You make it rich from the rent, or you'll be flat broke when the mortgage is due. Either way, it's fun when you play easy money, easy money.
Easy Money and Racco, 2 good reasons that
Milton Bradley makes the best games in the world.
Get Racco!
And easy money from MB.
Easy Money is a board game that was introduced by Milton Bradley in 1935 and bears similarity to Parker Brothers' game of Monopoly. After the success of Monopoly, Milton Bradley discovered similar games that had been on the market, but which had been bought out by Parker Brothers. The earliest version of Easy Money was based on Elizabeth Maggie's inspired 1904 patent for the Landlord's game. Despite this, Parker Brothers still sued Milton Bradley for patent infringement, and the latter was forced to license the former's patents to continue production of the game. When discussing Easy Money, one other version does need to be mentioned. Wartime Easy Money was licensed by Somerville Games in Canada during World War II. This version is way different from the normal version, as it does come with victory bond spaces, spaces to buy war bond savings stamps, soldier welfare projects, air raid defense plans, blackout regulations, and even a Red Cross project. Wartime Easy Money has enough features in it to make it an entirely different game, so I will be going over it in a different video. Standard Easy Money was released in 1935 and again printed again in 1936, 1956, 1958, and finally in 1974 under Milton Bradley's banner. The game was finally reprinted in 2005 from Winning Moves Games. There were some changes made between 1935 and the 1936 edition. Of these changes, the give and take space was removed, and instead, if you roll a double, you draw a give or take card. And the deeds were removed with colored houses representing ownership of property, and the information was then added directly to the board. All subsequent reprints were printed off of the 1936 edition. Depending on what edition you have, the pieces can vary, but most editions come with 6 pawns in black, blue, red, yellow, green, and purple, 16 houses in each color, 24 give and take cards, a game board, a set of rules, and some editions come with trays for play money and compartments for houses. The money does vary as well, as some editions come with 1s and 2s, some come with $5,000 bills, some come with 20s. It just varies depending on what edition you have. For the purpose of this video, I will be going over the rules for the 1936 edition. I would double check with what edition you have to verify that these rules are accurate. I would also mention that the 2005 version did cut the game down to 4 players. The playing board is divided into 48 spaces. Of these, 22 are property spaces, streets, avenues, and roads. 5 are utility spaces, 3 are public buildings, 1 is a city hospital, and 17 are legend spots with instructions to the player. Building costs are the numbers preceded by the letter B, as for example B110, in the circle surrounding the center of the board. They are building costs that the player must pay the bank for each building they place on their property. Mortgage values are the numerals directly beneath the building costs, also in the circle. They are preceded by the letter M, as for example M240. They show the amount the player owning the property may borrow from the bank if they mortgage a property. To charge rent, the figures on the outside end of the property show the amount of rent collected by the player with one building on that property. The adjacent figures show the rent collectible for the property with 2, 3, 4, or 5 buildings. Utility spaces such as the Airedale Bus Lines, LM Navigation Company, LM Telephone Company, Interurban Transit Company, and Associated Airways, each of these bears a legend stating the amount collected by the owner or lessee when the opponent's pawn stops on it. Utilities are sold at auction the same as property spaces, but no buildings are built on them. The agent, however, gives the buyer a building of their own color which is placed on the outer edge of the utility to identify its owner. The City Hospital, Waldorf Hotel, Black Cat Nightclub, and Majestic Theater are not properties in the same sense as streets and avenues, and are governed by the individual rules that I will be going over now. In the case of the Waldorf Hotel, players bid for position of manager of the hotel, the award going to the highest bidder. They collect from each guest who stops at the hotel space 10 times the amount of the dice thrown which landed the guest at the hotel. While, of course, no buildings are erected on the hotel space, the player owning the place may put a building of their color to identify ownership. For example, if a player throws a 5 and a 2 and lands on the Waldorf, they have thrown a 7 and must pay the hotel manager 10 times the amount, so $70 for accommodations. In the case of the Black Cat Nightclub, players bid for proprietor again, and the club going to the highest bidder. They collect $50 from each player whose pawn stops on that space, whether landing there on a throw of the dice or sent there by a give or take card. Should a pawn be sent to the nightclub by a give or take card before the club is sold, they do not pay, but the club is immediately offered for sale, and after it is sold, each player landing on it pays the owner $50. Just as the other two I've mentioned, players may bid for leasing the Majestic Theater. The successful bidder identifies it with a building of their color. They then collect $100 for percentage of receipts from each player who stops on that space. The next space that needs to be mentioned is the City Hospital. This is not a sellable position and you can't put any buildings on it, but it may prove to be great value for enriching the fortunes of any player. 2 spaces on the board are related to the City Hospital. The first is the airplane crash, where you pay the hospital $200. The second is the auto accident, where you pay the hospital $150. Whenever a pawn lands on either of those spaces, they pay the amount specified to the hospital by placing the amount on the outer edge of the board with the City Hospital. The next pawn that lands on the City Hospital by throw of the dice collects all the money on the hospital and adds it to their own private capital. If there is no money on the hospital space, of course, a pawn landing there collects nothing. If it happens while one player's pawn is on the City Hospital and another player stops on the airplane crash or auto accident and pays the hospital remittance, the pawn already on the space cannot collect it. A player may only collect money that is on the hospital when they arrive at the point by throw of the dice. Money paid to the hospital while a player is resting on that space is left on the hospital for the next player landing on that space. Other board spaces such as the Radio Program Contest, United Trust Company, Espinosa Lottery, YMCA Belmont, park races, etc. carry out their own instructions. Where a legend reads take or win, the player takes the amount of specified from the bank. When stopping on the spaces which read pay or lose, they pay the amount stated to the bank unless otherwise specified. There is a bonus that each time a player makes a circuit of the board and stops on the cross space marked bonus, they collect $250 from the bank. The give and take cards are placed face down in a pack at any convenient point on the table. When a player throws doubles on any number, before moving their pawn, they draw the top card of the give or take deck and follow the instructions printed on it. Even though it is first throw of the game, if a card drawn instructs him to go to a specified space, they must move their pawn to that space and then their turn is ended. If the text reads take or play, they act accordingly and then move their pawn to the number of spaces indicated by the dice. If a player draws a special exemption card, the player drawing it retains it, and while it is in their possession, they are exempt from violation of traffic rules or paying any taxes. They may, however, if they wish, sell the card to the highest bidders so they can realize cash for it. Colored buildings are improvements and are to be placed on a property. They are purchased from the bank, except for one building a player receives with each property they buy. The term property always refers only to those spaces with named streets, roads, or avenues on which more than one building may be placed, not the utilities or public buildings. To play this game, appoint one player as an agent, also known as a banker, for all transactions, who also acts as a referee in case of disputes. The agent takes part in the game, same as the other players, but they also have custody of the buildings and also the script money at the beginning of the game. The agent gives each player $2,000 in script money, made up of various denominations. The balance of money is then placed in the bank in the center of the board. Players throw the dice, high throw having first play. The player throws the dice again and moves their pawn from the starting point in the direction indicated by the arrow, a number of spaces equal to the total number of upmost on the dice. If the pawn lands on a property, the agent announces the name of the property, its building cost, and rent schedule, and offers it up for sale at auction with one building. The highest bidder is declared owner of the property. They pay the bank the amount of bid and give a building of the identifying color, the same color as the pawn or playing piece. They then place the building over the first figure at the outside end of the property space. The numerals which the building covers represent the rent, which the player will then therefore collect from each opponent whose pawn stops on that property. If a player's pawn lands on a utility or public building, the agent reads the name and the amount collected by the owner and offers it for sale to the highest bidder. The buyer is given a colored building of their color, which they place on the space purchased to identify ownership. The second player now throws the dice and plays like the first player, the agent auctioning off the space on which that player's pawn lands. The process for all other players is the same. When a player has acquired one property and identified it with a colored building, their next property must be purchased on another side of the board. That is, a player cannot have more than one property on the same side of the board, nor more than one building on any one property until they have first purchased 4 properties, one each on 4 different sides of the board. A player having 4 properties, one each on 4 sides of the board, with one building on each property, may now purchase other buildings from the bank to be added to their acquired properties. They may build from 2 to 5 buildings on any or all of their 4 properties and thereby collect maximum rent. When a player has 4 properties, one on each side of the board, they may buy any unsold property when it is offered for sale and build on it immediately. If a player uses all the buildings of their own color and buys more property, they identify it with one building of their own color on the outside end of the space and use pieces of any available color to represent their additional buildings. A player may buy a utility or public building whenever it is offered for sale, even though they have real estate property spaces on the same side of the board. Each utility has an independent unit and has no relation to any other utility nor the properties on which buildings are built. The same rules apply to public buildings, for example, the theater, the hotel, the nightclub, as each of these also have an independent unit without affiliation to any other units. The bank is obligated to offer an unsold property for sale the first time a pawn lands on it and accept the highest bid. It may be that 3 players already have a property on that side of the board on which a space is offered for sale and cannot bid on it. Therefore, the 4th player may bid on it for an absurd price, as $5 for example, and the bank must sell. When a player has acquired a property, street, road, or avenue with one building on it, they collect from each opposing player who lands on it the amount printed at the end of the property space towards the outside of the board. The second figure from the end indicates the amount of rent collected with 2 buildings on that property. The third figure shows the amount collected with 3 buildings, and so on, all the way up to 5. A player landing on their own property obviously does not have to pay anything. An owner may mortgage a property, borrowing from the bank the amount preceded by the letter M stated on that property. When a property is mortgaged, all buildings on it are stood on their end to show that it is mortgaged. The mortgage may be lifted by paying the bank the amount borrowed plus 10% interest. A player cannot collect rent nor build additional buildings on mortgaged property. Mortgaged property may be transferred for a consideration from one player to another, but the new owner must pay the bank the amount of the mortgage plus 10% interest before they can build anything new on the property and collect rent from that property. Public buildings such as the theater, hotel, and nightclub may be mortgaged for the amount stated on each, but a player cannot collect revenue on any public building while it is mortgaged. Utilities cannot be mortgaged. Their only income is the amount stated on each, collecting from opposing players who land on them. A player may purchase additional buildings or take out mortgages only when it is their turn of play, and must buy or mortgage before they throw the dice of their turn. If a player having utility or public building becomes pressed for money, they may sell it at any time to the highest bidder. When a player has insufficient cash to meet their rent due or meet other demands and has no further property to mortgage, they are then forced into bankruptcy. The bank forecloses and the game ends. Other players count up all cash on hand, and the one having the largest amount wins the game. The value of a mortgage property is deducted from a player's total amount of cash. For example, if a player at the end of a game holds $1,100 and has mortgaged property to the amount of $1,000, the $1,000 is deducted from their net cash, figuring as $100. Should the bank run out of funds, the game is called, and the player having the most money and property wins. Easy money is adapted to any number of players. If more play than the number of pawns included in the implements, the additional players may use buttons, poker chips, or any other suitable playing piece for their pawn. Well, this has been an overview of Easy Money from Milton Bradley. This game is pretty much a Monopoly knockoff. The game runs like you would think, runs with property, rent, utilities. It feels very much like Monopoly, except it is slightly different. The game is very well built, very organized. Depending on which version you have, every single version is different because it either has 4 players or up to 6 players, or like this edition here has unlimited options of players. The game money quantity changes. Some games have 1s and 2s, some games don't have 20, some games have $5,000 bills. Every version is slightly different. If you haven't played Easy Money before, I would recommend giving it a look, because it basically, if you're getting tired of Monopoly, this is another good option for you, because it plays like Monopoly, but it's a bit different. The game itself goes online anywhere from $5 to $50, depending on what edition you find, from what country you find. It's been around for a long time. Technically, it shouldn't exist because Parker Brothers sued over the licensing, but Milton Bradley thought this game was good enough to actually pay for Monopoly's licensing, so that way they could keep this game. So it's had several printings, like I said. It had a really weird war copy that was printed in Canada with war bonds. The game's had a very interesting life. If you haven't picked up Easy Money before, I would recommend giving it a look. And if you haven't played Easy Money before, it's a really good option for family game nights. If you want to invite friends over, if you want to have someone introduced to board gaming, this is a decent option for you, and it doesn't have a lot of the wrath that Monopoly picks up with all of the fighting and everything. So if you haven't picked up this game, I would recommend giving it a look, and I would recommend playing Easy Money. Well, that's it from us here at the Gamer's Closet. We'd like to thank you for checking out our video on Easy Money from Milton Bradley. If there's a game in the future you'd like us to review or go over, please put it in the comments below. Please hit subscribe so that we can be the first to check out our future content. And as always, please, have a great gaming day.